welcome to our shop, the Bob Reeves Brass. I'm John Snell.
I'm Brett Kendall.
It's such an honor to be a part of the William Adam Trumpet Festival. Normally we're traveling around and doing these things, and I never get to see the presentation. So it's been so awesome this year, even though we're shut down because of COVID-19, that we're able to do this virtually. And huge thanks to Dr. Carl Sievers for putting this together, because we've been here working and being able to watch all of the sessions, which we don't normally get to do, and we get to share this around the world and get a new audience. So welcome to all of you. First things before we get going, again, a huge thank you to Dr. Carl Sievers for allowing us to be a part of this. It's such a great event, and we hope that we can share some knowledge of ours and be an integral part of this festival. So, that being said, we will be taking some questions. I have the Facebook feed up here, so put some comments down there, put some questions for us, and as we're going through the presentation, we'll try to include those. And at the very end, if there's some time, we'll have some fun here and maybe make a mouthpiece, and while we're doing that, we can go through kind of a question and answer period. So that being said, let's get going with the presentation. Is your equipment working for or against you?
Okay, I mean, that's the issue, you know, is your equipment working for or against you, you know, and how can you tell where you're at, you know? I mean, your playing is always changing, or, you know, sometimes you have different jobs, or, you know, the situation that you work in is always evolving. Some things you can kind of predict, like, I mean, you're progressing as you're playing more and more, you're getting a stronger player, or maybe, you know, you're aging and there's, you know, things that happen that you can kind of see coming. Or sometimes you can't predict things. I mean, sometimes it's you get hired for a job you thought you'd never have, or, you know, maybe something happens with your health, or, you know, something sudden that you didn't see coming. And you need to possibly at that time, you know, reevaluate your equipment, your trumpet, your mouthpiece, and, you know, make the best choice to then move forward, you know, most successfully. So we want to kind of talk through different scenarios that we see and kind of when and how to, you know, approach these kinds of issues. You know, because I mean, we see it every day working with players. That's kind of our job, helping guys figure out, you know, oh, I've got an issue with this, or I've got an issue with that. You know, this is what's been happening. So that's kind of what we want to talk to today about, you know, equipment and, you know, when is it you and when is it the, you know, piece of metal.
And there's really sometimes no good answer for that, and sometimes it's a combination of things. Obviously, fundamentals and playing issues, which have been addressed by much more appropriate folks than myself already, but some of the situations have already arisen. There was a great panel last night or yesterday afternoon about weight loss and the physical effects of playing that change through weight loss, and that was an amazing, inspiring panel that was on, and that's one of those situations. And then the other thing is watching Nick Thorpe this morning talking about the skills you need to learn outside of brass playing, and a lot of times if you don't learn and when the opportunity arises, it's too late. And we see that with equipment all the time. You're set up on your equipment and you may be going fine, but you've never looked at it, you've never analyzed it, you've never experimented with equipment, and then you hit a wall, and by that point it's too late because you don't know what the equipment was doing for you before that point. So hopefully some of the things, and hopefully in a fun way today, because equipment is fun, right? It's a hunk of metal. We'll go through some of these scenarios, like Brett said, and do some demonstrations, not only on how to think about the equipment, but also the physics behind it, which, if you missed John Harbaugh's session on day one, I mean, he lays it out right there. We couldn't agree more with the concepts he was saying, because it's established science, the physics of the instrument and the mouthpiece, and what you're actually perceiving. It's not the airflow. So we'll demonstrate that, set some things on fire, and have some fun. So moving on here, it's really important to know where to start. And in some of the presentations I've done for the Adam Festivals in the past, I've set up kind of a pyramid, you know, and at the very base of the pyramid is obviously your playing. It's your fundamentals. Like, nothing is going to compensate for not having proper fundamentals. But then on top of that, you're going to start with the horn, right? The most important thing, your foundation is the 4 feet of tubing for a trumpet, longer if you're playing trombone or other brass, obviously. That's going to control most things in terms of the sound, the feel. You know, if your instrument has intonation problems, that's gonna, you can't compensate for that with the other stuff. Then the mouthpiece, then fine tuning of the gap, which you don't know what the gap is yet. We'll explain that. And then it's the other things. Players do kind of a shotgun approach, and they'll try to fix things with heavy caps or little doodads and things like that that may do something, but they don't have a logical approach, and they're going out of order. So we're going to set up why you need to go in a logical order when you are evaluating your equipment. So, Brett, I kind of went through it, but do you want to kind of explain why we should go with the trumpet and then the mouthpiece and then the gap?
Sure. I mean, like you said, so it's the order of what's most likely going to be controlling more than the other things. I mean, to start with the horn, I mean, the trumpet is, it's a tool, but you have to have the right tool for the job. So, I mean, for example, you're not going to play a C trumpet playing lead in a big band. You're not going to play, a bright screaming lead horn sitting in the orchestra, playing third or something. So you have to have the right tool for your job, and it's just the way it is. And a part of that is also having a valve alignment done so that your horn is playing the way that it should, because an instrument that is either maybe dirty or not set up right, or has just maybe was poorly manufactured. If maybe it's a student horn that they're starting out, that can set you back in ways that it can be very hard to compensate as a player. Especially if you're just learning. So the same thing goes with the mouthpiece. The mouthpiece is there's a comfort level involved because it's what you're feeling on your face, but it's the similar scenario where you need to have the right tool to do the job you're doing. You won't use an orchestral piece for lead playing, and that you're not hammering in screws with a hammer. You're using a screwdriver.
Right tool for the right job.
The right tool for the right job, right? And it's I guess the part of it is, like you're saying, it's a hierarchy where the mouthpiece then can be balanced to the instrument, and from there you can kind of balance the gap in the mouthpiece altogether. That gives you the optimal setup for what you're trying to do, the right resistance you need, the right sound you want, all the playing characteristics that you're looking for. You want them to be the very best, so that that when you're practicing, you're then going to make the most progress you can. Or when you're singing in an orchestra or at a job, in a session or something, you're going to be comfortable, and you're relying on it because it's the way it should be.
Yeah, our goal here is to kind of eliminate the connection between you and the audience. When your mouthpiece, the gap, the instrument is all dialed in correctly, it's just you, what's in your head, and then what you're conveying to the audience. And that's why we get along so well with a lot of the Atom folks, because that's their, that's their method in terms of imagining your sound, and you're hearing your sound, getting your head in the sound, because that's what you want to imagine to do the physical side of things. And depending on the job, like Brett's saying, or depending on the demands, or depending on health factors, things like that, for maybe most of your playing, you'll be able to overcome inefficiencies in the equipment, but everyone has a wall. It may be the demands of the job, it may be age, it may be endurance, things like that, and that is where equipment comes in. We like to not think about equipment because we want to be able to fix everything ourselves, and there's something to be said for that kind of confidence. However, they're tools, just like an athlete uses a tool, uses their golf equipment, uses their shoes, to help them perform. An artist uses their brushes. You have to have kind of a symbiotic relationship with your tools and understand them enough so that they can help you. And that's what we're going to kind of go through here. And please, if you have any questions, throw them in the comments if we go over something or we use a term that we use every day, maybe in technology or whatnot, or in the equipment that you're not familiar with. Put it in the comments, and we'll be happy to answer it for you. We already got Thomas Johnson is talking about suggestions for a mouthpiece, and we will get to how to choose a mouthpiece. And it looks like he has a box Strad picked out personally by Mr. Adam, so don't lose that horn. That's our number one rule. So we're going to cover some ground rules here, just so we're all kind of coming from the same basis. The first rule comes from Bob Reeves, and I think he told me this on the first day I worked here 19 years ago. Everything affects everything. And that can drive you nuts, but it's true. Well, does this kind of material affect this? Does this kind of mouthpiece affect this? Yes, it does. Everything from your lips to the end of the bell has an effect as a system on the performance and what you feel and the sounds you hear. So it's important to realize that. So if you change a trumpet, maybe the mouthpiece needs to change. If you change a mouthpiece, maybe the gap needs to change. All of that affects. So you always need to be thinking, if something changed, do I need to reevaluate? So that's the first ground rule. The next one, and this one we're going to have fun with. Maybe we should save this to last because we have a cool demonstration here.
Yeah.
So we'll save this one to last. The next one would be, it's just metal, right? This thing, this mouthpieces, it's metal. There's nothing magic in this. Mm-hmm. It's literally $10, $20 worth of brass, hunk of brass,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, Brett, you might want to speak to this a little bit.
Yeah, I think a lot of people that, we hear it all the time, either at conferences or people calling in, they say, I love my mouthpiece, I love my horn, but I have this issue. And if they're afraid of, or they're worried about changing, the piece of metal they're holding onto, and it's just like, maybe you can make a change. And we see it all the time. They, we'll recommend something for them, or we'll do something, if it's a mouthpiece or an alignment, those kinds of things. And then they'll say, you know what, it plays great. This is what I was looking for. So you can't be afraid of changing what the mouthpiece is, even if you've been playing it for 30, 20 years, whatever it is. Your whole career you've been using this equipment. But things change. You're an older person now. You're playing different jobs now. Maybe you live somewhere else. Those things all matter. So you can't be attached, just to that what it is. Because it's a tool.
It's a tool. That's what it all comes down to. Last ground rule, and this, you're going to want to watch John Harbaugh's presentation on day one. I think it's down below. I think it's archived on the physics of brasses, because this is the key. In terms of how your equipment works, there's no airflow in the trumpet. No airflow in the mouthpiece. That's not what you're feeling. It's all acoustics. Now, you have to separate that from what you may teach, and this is with the Atom method. You talk about the energy, riding on the wind, things like that. What you teach your students may be different in how you visualize and things like that. But when you're understanding the equipment, there's no airflow. It's an acoustic standing wave. And there was already the demonstration that John Harbaugh did with the tube, and just exciting the molecules in the tube with a flame, with a torch, and that got us inspired to play with fire too, so we'll be doing that here in a moment. And that created a sound. And you could both see it and you could hear it because of exciting the air molecules. And that's what's going on in the instrument. And that's what you're perceiving back. He talks about the Bernoulli effect, some cool scientific terms of, but what's actually going on with your lips? Yes, 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 that is it. So when we get a phone call or an email or whatever of saying, hey, I go up in the upper register and I can't get enough air through, already the player is coming from the wrong stance, the wrong concept, because there is no airflow going through there. They're perceiving a stuffiness because of acoustic resistance. What does that mean for you? That means you have to go into thinking about equipment from things may not be what you think. People think, okay, if it's bigger, you can get more air through. Wrong. If it's bigger, a lot of times you get more acoustic resistance. So that's why so many brass players that bore open their mouthpiece to get more air through, now the bore size is bigger, makes the mouthpiece stuffy. All of a sudden it doesn't play as well, they throw it in the drawer and they go on to the next experiment. So let's demonstrate no airflow. So we have some cool things. Brett, you want to explain? This is a concept Richard Smith did. Yeah. Richard Smith, Smith Watkins Trumpets over in the UK. He did a great YouTube video demonstrating this on trombone. So we've made a trumpet version. So Brett, you want to take us through this here?
Yeah. So, it's like you said, it's a similar concept to what he made. We have a bottom of a mouthpiece here, and we have basically it's a rim here and the rest of an underpart, a back bore more or less coming off the side here. So what we can do, they slip together basically, but there's enough room in there that we can put a membrane across the top of the cup so that you can, you can still play on the rim, but what's going to happen is the membrane will vibrate putting energy through the mouthpiece, but the air is going to escape out this way. There's a hole here on the inside of the cup, so that you're not playing into a solid piece of metal, basically, or a solid thing. But so basically, what happens is this part of the mouthpiece is acoustically sympathetic to this part of the mouthpiece, and so when we put these together, it plays relatively close to what to a normal mouthpiece and trumpet are going to play. And it kind of shows, it demonstrates a lot of how, what the mouthpiece controls and what the trumpet controls, because they do different jobs, basically.
So what we're going to do, we have this lovely membrane that's been laying around the shop. So we seal off the part of the mouthpiece that is going through the horn. And I'll grab my horn here. And my apologies to everyone, I did not fire it up this morning. So feel free to pan me in the comments because I did not go through routine this morning. So as you can see, we got the mouthpiece that's sealed off. No air going through the horn. And then when I unplug this exit hole, there'll be air escaping here. And it should sound kind of like a trumpet, or at least as much as sounding like a trumpet that I can play. Right? Decent trumpet sound with no airflow actually going through the horn, going through the bell. It's all escaping out the side, right? And as Brett said, the reason why we need this, if I start playing lower, the wavelength gets beyond what this backbore can sympathetically produce, and so then I have to kind of make the note happen through buzzing, which of course is what we don't want to happen when we're playing. So as I go lower, you'll notice the sound starts to get out of focus, and I have to kind of muscle the note out, and it still doesn't sound very good. Right? So I'm basically having to buzz those notes in order to get it to speak because I'm not getting the standing wave set up that I can respond to in my chops. Now, I mean, if we had another trumpet line around here, do we have another trumpet?
Yeah, we have.
We can add 4 feet of tubing and then really go nuts here. Really go nuts. We've had a lot of fun with this shop, and we're actually producing a video that we'll post that kind of gets into this further. So now, you're not going to see this anywhere else. If we add an extra 4 feet of tubing, now we can set up a sympathetic harmonic. Can you,
Yeah.
There we go. Right? So now the low C, you may not be able to hear it, but I can certainly feel the low C slots in now. And then the other thing is you have to be able to play the correct note, because if you go off of that pitch, it starts to, it's destructive. It's not sympathetic anymore. So if I get more than a half step away, it can bend the pitch maybe a half step or so, and then beyond a half step, it just shuts itself off. But so it's a pretty cool thing that kind of demonstrates the fact that while we need air to kind of use as a cushion for our lips, acoustically, a trumpet will sound like a trumpet without anything.
Right.
Right? And again, a lot of the Atom teachers, I remember Charlie Davis telling me, it's like, this is all you need, right? That's a nice pedal C right there. There's no air. That's just exciting the air molecules to play that. So there you go, the no airflow mouthpiece. And we promised we were going to set things on fire. So, and this is the perfect crowd because all you Atom players, I want to say blow the lead pipe, right? So now we're going to blow the lead pipe even though there's no air going through. You want to switch positions so that you can be on this side?
Yeah.
We'll do-si-do here. All right, so I'm playing. Right, I'm getting fired up. And
Literally.
remember, the air is coming out here. No air is actually going through here. But watch what happens with the excitement of the air molecules in the lead pipe. Okay, can we see the flame? Okay. So we were able to blow out a candle with the standing wave and that energy in the lead pipe.
Because it's literally, I mean, it's the vibration of the air is moving back and forth, and that's enough
Yeah.
to blow out a flame.
And you could feel it with your hand.
Right.
And no danger of COVID here because it's not air. It's the molecules that are already, that I've already blown out.
Yeah,
Never
sure.
mind. So if you have a friend, you can bet them $100 and say, if you have a no airflow mouthpiece, I bet you I can blow out a candle with no air. And if you have a friend with $100, send it my way because I could use the $100. There we go. So that's the no airflow mouthpiece. And what does that show? Does that mean you don't need air? No, we need air to play an instrument. We need air to get a full sound and things like that. But at least in terms of how we're thinking of the equipment, it's not airflow, it's acoustics, it's a standing wave.
Right.
And that's going to get into how to choose an instrument, that's going to get into how to choose a mouthpiece, and that's going to get into what the gap does. And the astounding thing on our side of things is there's teachers that talk about airflow in terms of the equipment, and there's manufacturers, mouthpiece manufacturers, repair people, instrument manufacturers that say their instruments are designed around airflow. And it's mind-boggling because this is not new stuff. You know,
Yeah.
this goes acoustic studies that go back 100 years. There's the Benet book that I think was published in the 70s. I mean, Bill Cardwell, who Bob worked with for decades, you know, this has been established. Bob set up the alignment in the sleeves. He patented that in the 70s. So this is not new stuff. Yet there's still misinformation out there about how our equipment actually functions. So we're trying to fight the good fight.
Yeah.
So thank you guys so much for the comments. Keep them coming. And oh yeah, Sean, can you do 2 horns at once with this setup? There, see, we already answered your question. So we're going to try to do one with 3 or 4 horns and see how many.
One day.
One day, you know, with all the extra time we have, we're going to, you know, see how many sympathetic vibrations we can get going on. Because why not, right?
Why not?
So you want to start talking? Let's move on.
Yeah.
So to the first thing you want to look at when you're evaluating your equipment is the trumpet, the 4 feet of tubing. So Brett, you want to talk about when you need to choose an instrument, things like that?
Sure. I mean, it kind of goes with a lot of what we said already. I mean, it depends on who you are as a player, where you are in your progression, what kind of music you're playing. So, you know, I mean, and then kind of with what we're going with, you know, what's changing is where we're trying to talk to. You know, I mean, what as a player, how are you changing? You know, so sometimes you're, you know, younger students, they're starting to get more serious. They're in high school, maybe they want to go to college. Obviously, that's a great time for them to buy a, you know, a really good trumpet. You know, something that can help them then progress to the level that they want to as a, you know, more professional player. You know, I mean, if you're noticing your horn has issues, I mean, we hear that guys say, well, I've been playing this horn for years. It's always been a little stuffy. It's always been a little out of tune. And it's like, well, maybe that's the sign that maybe there's something wrong with that horn. Is, you know, is it dirty? Does it need to be cleaned? Do you need a valve alignment? You know, which honestly, typically we see all, you know, the vast majority of horns need valve alignments. You know, but you're, as a player, you know, you're taught, well, I can fight over that. I can, you know, overcome what the trumpet is doing. But you're not, you know, if you're fighting the instrument, you can't make the same progress you're going to make, and you can't, you know, play as good as you really could without that, you know, handicap there, you know. So it's kind of, again, I mean, when would you need a new horn? You have a new job, you know, you're playing more commercial music, you're doing more recording sessions, you're doing something like that, where it's something new to you. Obviously, you need new equipment. And kind of, you know, what you're looking for, you know, you have to consider, you know, what tool is best. You know, are you playing commercial music? You know, what kind of sound do you want to have? You know, who are the players that you love and their sound, and kind of maybe what kind of equipment are they using? And kind of how can you start getting towards your goal? You know, and that's the thing, it's individual, you know. You as a player, you have your sound that you want to have, you have your, you know, career goal, that the things you want to do, that you have to have all the right tools that are set up right to get you to that point. So it's, it's a personal thing that, has a lot to do with where you are in your life.
And one of the tricky issues is dealing with your students, because you want to instill in your students the confidence that they can overcome things in the practice room, things like that. But also, I think it's helpful early on to start getting them interested in equipment intelligently. Because look, with the internet out there, they're going to find out on their own. And I remembered that when I was teaching lessons, and all of a sudden kids were coming in and said, well, what does this mouthpiece do? What does that mouthpiece do? And I was like, wait a minute, man, we're still on the first page of the Arbenz book, but they're already on Google, And so if you don't start teaching your students at an early age about what the equipment can do for them and how to balance what they need to do in the practice room with what they need, what they should look out in equipment, then they'll do it on their own, and then we know what happens, right? So for like with students, when they start to get serious, get them on a step-up instrument, or talk about investing in maybe a pro instrument or a used pro instrument, when they're going off to college, get them a good C trumpet, things like that if they're going into classical. There's a lot of different scenarios like that you can, hey, my student's going into a senior year, he's thinking about auditioning for colleges, look at his equipment. If they're playing on a student horn still, that's going to hold them back, because if they're talented enough that they've been putting in the effort enough to go on to college, that student instrument may have intonation issues and not play with a full enough sound that a pro instrument will. So think about those kinds of things, along with, like, as a more advanced or a professional, the career changes or the job. I think you mentioned it. A lot of the calls we get are the orchestral players that all of a sudden are using their big large bore C trumpet, or an orchestral B flat trumpet, and then they have to play a pops concert, or the classical major at school that graduates and their first job is on a cruise ship and they're playing a lot of top 40 stuff, things like that. Yeah. So those are the things you can kind of start preparing for now and say, okay, what kind of instruments would I need to get that job done? Mm-hmm. So then you have an instrument you like. You have an instrument. I think who is it? Tom up ahead, further up in the comments, talked about his hand-picked Mr. Adam horn. Probably a great instrument and one you don't want to get rid of, right? Well, is it playing the best? The most important thing you can do on an instrument is the valve alignment. And for those of you that have gone to the Adam Festival and seen me working and Brett working and doing alignments there at the show, you know what this is about. Basically, and for those of you that are new to this, valve alignment is basically real simple. It's the holes in the valves. We have a little, I think this is an old Benge valve casing that Bob chopped up. Hole in the valve doesn't line up with the hole in the casing. There's no voodoo about this. This is basic physics, basic design, basic engineering. And we have two positions on each valve, up and down. And the hole in the valve should line up perfectly with the hole in the slide in both positions. So you have 6 combinations on 1, 2, and 3, right? Up and down on all 3 that need to be aligned. In piccolo, you have 8 combinations, right? And what we'll find, and we know we've done probably 15 or 20,000 horns by this point, is they're not correct. Each valve will be off by a different amount. And as we know, it's not an airflow thing, because if you take a 459 or 460, right, medium large bore, and you turn it to 450, and you blow through it, you're not going to feel a difference. You can get plenty of air through a 450 bore as you could a 460 bore. So what is it? It's the A word, right? Mm-hmm. It's acoustics. We're making a bore change if your valve is off 10,000ths of an inch, right? 3 human hairs. That's changing the bore from 460 to 450. And if for those of you who've played medium or small bore horns, that is a huge playing difference because of the acoustic properties. And this is something that Bill Cardwell, who I mentioned earlier, was, so great at discovering this sort of stuff. It's a perturbation theory. And basically what perturbation theory means is you can change the intonation pattern and the response of an instrument based on bore changes at specific points throughout the horn. So he worked with olds. There's some famous trumpets that he built with olds that could play perfectly in tune based on this theory. And we've done some of that work here previously with a C trumpet and a B flat trumpet. And But that's the thing. We control the bore size throughout the horn to make those intonation changes. With a valve alignment, you don't know where it is. It could be close on one valve and then way out when it's in the downstroke position. It may be way out on the second valve and close on the opposite, and then the third valve maybe doesn't matter, because by that point, there's so many different combinations, you can't predict what your intonation pattern and what your response is going to be like. So that's why the valve alignment is critical. And to kind of harp on that for one more thing, what we know is that the three most critical spots in the trumpet are the first few inches, which would include the mouthpiece, the gap, the venturi into the lead pipe. Okay, makes sense. The very last 1.5 or 2 inches, which makes sense, that's the bell flare. And this is the one people forget about, halfway through.
Yeah.
Halfway through. And where does that put it conveniently? Right somewhere in the valve cluster. So if you have a bore change or something in there, it could have a critical effect on slotting, projection, intonation, response, you name it, colors in the sound, and it doesn't take much. Why are valves out of a line? Pad material, felts, corks. Rubber is a little bit better, but rubber as it gets old will expand. Neoprene is probably the newest material that people use, and it's terrible. It's terrible. Why? Because you can compress neoprene, I mean, 30 thousandths, 40 thousandths of an inch. The difference between a 460 bore and a 420 bore just depends on how angry you are when you're doing your Clarks.
Right.
Right? So that's part of it, the pad material. And then also, I mean, it takes us a couple hours to do a valve alignment here. Most manufacturers don't take the time to do it. And so even we see brand new horns straight from the factory that are out of alignment. People don't like to hear that. They just spent $4,000 on a brand new custom horn. It's out of alignment. It needs to be fixed. But hey, you know, that's what, if you buy a $100,000 Porsche, first thing you do is take it down to your shop and get it adjusted and get it fine-tuned to how you play. So that's pretty much the alignment. Anything you want to add to that, Brett?
Yeah, I mean, well, the one thing I think that is important to add is that the other side of the alignment, I mean, you mentioned it with the pad material, you know, a felt and the rubber pad and all this stuff, a cork, you know, for very old horns. It's going to change, and that's part of the thing. I mean, we're talking out here, you know, when is your equipment working for or against you? You know, if you've been playing the horn for 5-10 years and you love it, and then, you know, you just kind of realize one day, what's going on, this isn't what I want. A lot of times, you know, very likely, that's the valve alignment has changed. You know, you got used to it and you love the horn at first, and now the alignment, as those pads have gotten thinner and thinner, or maybe they expanded it depending on what the material is, the alignment has changed, the horn is playing different. You know, we see that all the time. You know, guys, you know, even, I mean, like you're saying, 10 thousandths of an inch, it doesn't sound like a lot, but that's enough that you're going to feel that difference in the horn, and we commonly see, you know, 30, 40 thousandths of an inch on horns being misalignment on their ports. And so that's, you know, it has to be done. You're not going to know how the instrument really plays until the valve alignment has been fixed, because it's you know, it's the fundamental thing to the horn. That's what the way that Bob puts it. It's, you know, it's your ground zero. You make the horn, you know, you pick the horn you love, get the alignment done, then you know what it's doing, and then you can make more educated decisions for your mouthpiece, for the gap, for, I mean, if other things you maybe want to look at after that.
A lot of great questions coming in, and sorry, the shop is open, so we just got a UPS delivery, so sorry about that. Carl Sievers had a question that I want to address about if the horn can play better if the valve alignment is off versus correct. And that's a great question, and we actually have a video on our YouTube channel of kind of with Bob Reeves working with one of our customers, and it's very interesting because he played his instrument, and the valve combination when the horn was not aligned that he liked the best was the valve that was out of alignment the most. I believe it was his first or second valve, and you know, he played through the Bugle series, and I'll talk about that in a second, open, second, first, and then third. And the response and the sound of the first valve, for example, that customer liked the best. And then when we measured the alignment to see how far off it was, the first valve was out the furthest. So why is that? Well, because you want the instrument and the mouthpiece to match the energy that you're putting into the instrument. And for some reason, he was used to the misaligned valve that matched the energy that he naturally wanted to put into the instrument. Okay, so does that mean he shouldn't get his valves aligned? No, because I'll spoil the video. He ended up doing the alignment, right? After the alignment, he was able to make adjustments with the mouthpiece and the gap to match the energy he wanted to put in, with the benefit of the instrument being even and predictable, right? Because here's the thing, with the misaligned valve, yes, we could have conceivably gone through and misaligned the valves a similar amount, but then your horn is choked down and you're still having negative acoustic effects in the valve casing that aren't predictable. So by doing the alignment, maybe throwing off the balance of what he wants to, for what energy he wants to put in, we're making this part of the instrument predictable and consistent, so that then we can make a more valued, more measured adjustment here that will give the customer more success in the long run. And also in terms of efficiency, right? Because if we can get more bang for our buck out of our equipment, which is what I consider an efficient setup, when the valves are choked down here, that means you have to go bigger somewhere in the mouthpiece, because there can only be so much, resistance in your whole setup. So if the horn is opened up more, that means you can go with a more efficient mouthpiece. More efficient mouthpiece means you're working not as hard to get the same amount of sound and projection and things like that. So Carl, hopefully that answered your question. There was one other quick question. Brett, do you want to talk about this, about prioritizing? I think it was David who was asking about what happens if the ports are inherently out of alignment, so they're not spaced.
Inherently out of alignment.
Well, so like the spacing's not correct.
So like, as in parts are made poorly?
Yeah,
Is that the interpretation?
yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, part of the thing is that, there's several parts that go into making the valve casing and the valves themselves. So, that's part of the game too, is that we have to measure every horn we see to see what it is before we do the valve alignment, to see, what the correct position should be. And when Bob was first developing the alignment, he went through a long process of doing, different styles of alignment, basically to kind of find out what worked for, the vast majority of players. Because he determined basically what players are really feeling. Which ports are the most important, which ports are not. So that's, the way we do our valve alignment is, informed by that research he did. So that, effectively, everything is to some degree a compromise, but the way we do it, it makes it play as even as it can, and respond as fast as it can, and as good as it can, and without reducing any color in the sound, without changing things that obviously negative things that you don't want. So it's just basically the answer is there's a lot of research that went into determining what's the best parts of the valve and parts of the casing that need to be lined up.
Yeah, so prioritizing the valve ports so it plays the best with what you have. And really, yeah, we see that fairly often, but unless you have a horn built in the mid-1800s, like a vintage cornet, or I guess that wouldn't be vintage, that'd be antique, right? Civil War cornet or something like that. Really, the ports are close enough and the valves are close enough that the horn's going to play better with an alignment, and then the horn is never going to be perfect, and as trumpet players and brass players, that can drive us nuts, but really, it's a man-made instrument. There's soldering and unique things about every instrument. It's impossible to make two trumpets alike, but you can also don't want to spend $1 million to get a NASA perfect trumpet that's designed to the millionth of an inch, right? It's just not feasible. So that's pretty much all we have to say on alignment. Of course, if you have any more questions, throw them in the comments. And then, so you have your horn, you have your valve alignment, and I should back up real quick. The thing about the valve alignment, this comes from Bob Reeves. Bob came up with the alignment not because he wanted something to sell, not because he came up with the alignment out of necessity, because he had players coming in week after week after week for mouthpiece adjustments, right? And these are the top studio players, the top, LA Phil players and NHK Symphony, and top players in the world were coming through his shop, and they were coming in for mouthpiece adjustments day after day after day, week after week. And he realized that these players weren't changing. They were the strongest players in the world. Their mouthpiece that he bored out or adjusted the week before didn't change in a week. And he realized that the instrument was changing. the pads were compressing, and so the alignment was changing. So the balance in the horn was changing on a weekly basis. And so it was out of necessity. First, he needed a way to stabilize it, and second, he needed a way to measure it and adjust it so it played the best. And so it all comes down to finding what works for the musician to allow them to do a better job. And someone asked, how long does the alignment last? The way we do them, we adjust the valves to our material. Our material lasts anywhere from 5 to 10 years. So you only need to do the alignment once. And then in terms of replacing your pads, use your judgment. I mean, if you're playing 4 hours a day and it's your main horn, probably closer to 4 or 5 years. If it's your piccolo trumpet that you pick up every Easter, probably 10 years, if not longer. Our material, you can get it wet, you can get oil on it, it doesn't expand, it doesn't break down. It just will, over the course of 5 or 10 years, start to compress to the point where it'll start, and this is the important part, it'll start to affect, maybe on the fringes of the performance of the instrument. A felt pad, a neoprene pad, in a matter of weeks will, I mean, that's how big of a difference we're talking about.
Yeah.
When it comes down to consistency, regulate the alignment, and then you don't have to worry about it. You can focus on getting your head in the sound, things like that, right? So you have that, you have your horn, it's been aligned, choosing a mouthpiece, right? You want to talk about this?
Sure. So it's it's the same thing. I mean, it's your tool, the right tool for the job. There's a lot of different scenarios, obviously, as a player. I mean, if students are just starting out, you probably want to pick something that's going to be comfortable for them. You don't want them on a huge, like 1C toilet bowl. You don't want them on a tiny little pea shooter, lead mouthpiece. You want something comfortable in the middle that's going to work for them because, and that's something that maybe they need to try, maybe a few different sizes when they're just starting out. Maybe they try a 3C, maybe they try a 7C or a 10.5. A few things to see. Maybe one's going to set up their chops as a young player a little bit better, and then that gets them, that next step forward, possibly instantly, because they make that sound, and that's that, they start learning what that sensation feels like. So that's, it's an important thing to consider, when you're teaching your students. And then also the same thing as you're progressing. I mean, students who are getting more serious, they want either more specialized mouthpieces, they start playing more different kinds of music. They get into high school, they're playing jazz band, they're playing orchestra, they might want a different tool. And it's the same scenario, you use the right tool for the job. A lead mouthpiece may help you, you can play, lead in a big band on a 3C, but do you really want to? Are you going to beat yourself up after a certain point? It's, you have to consider what's most efficient, or what's most comfortable and most efficient, so that as much energy as you put into the horn, you're getting a relatively what would we say, valuable amount out of it.
Yeah, and speaking of that, it's about students. I have a story. I used to coach a middle school band, and they're brass players, and for years, they would basically have the mouthpiece that was in their case and the school instrument, and I'd start them off, and I mean, look, let's be honest, out of 20 or 30 starting brand new trumpet players, there was always 1 or 2, depending on the year, maybe as many as 3 or 4, that would struggle getting a tone. Now if I was Bill Berggren, who's a master teacher, maybe I wouldn't have had that issue with my students. But year after year, there was always a couple, because of their embouchure or whatever, that struggled to get those first notes on either a lead pipe or the mouthpiece or the instrument. And one year I decided to bring, because I had the luxury of being here at the shop, I took everything from a 10.5C up to a 1C. And I didn't tell them what they were or what sizes they were, because they're brand new. And I wanted to see if they could get a note on the lead pipe easier on any one of those. I think I had 4 or 5. I didn't have all the models, but really small, couple in the middle, maybe a couple really big. And first I was surprised that there are some people that the 10.5C, which we would consider pretty small, worked great for some. And then even a 1C for a middle school student, who'd have thought? But from then on, for 2 or 3 years when I continued teaching, there wasn't one student who couldn't make a sound on the first day. And that's critical, because you think about who gets, when you get excited about an instrument and they just get that initial, sometimes for some of these kids, it's the first thing they've ever done in their life that's successful. They're terrible at math, they're terrible at science, terrible at English or whatever, but they can make a sound the first day. And some of those students, went on. So just having a few sizes and saying, okay, you don't start on a 7C or you don't start on this, but see what at least might sit on your face a little bit better, and then we can go from there. From that very first note can make a difference. So that's my story on that. And then the other thing about equipment, I forgot what I was going to say. So fine, okay. That was my story. Oh, and about students. And someone asked about this. They're playing a 3C and they're in high school. A lot of tension can develop, and I've seen this again with my own students. They're playing a 3C or a 1.5C or whatever, and then they're talented, they put an effort, and they're put lead in the jazz band, and their band director has them playing big fat band charts or Tom Kubis charts. And all of a sudden their playing goes out the window because they're developing tension, because they're not ready to play those notes, and they're trying to force them to do it on a mouthpiece that's not designed to do that thing. And yes, you can play those notes on a 3C. Yes, you can do that, but you want to help your students. So going to something that's not, again, extreme, but will help with the compression in the upper register. Obviously, if they don't have those notes, they're not going to get it on any mouthpiece. But let's say they do have a decent range, but they're having to pound in big band, maybe get them something like a 42S or something that is not extreme, around the same diameter, that will allow them to still be relaxed as they're playing the Tom Kubis charts in 10th grade. So that was the other thing I wanted to mention. Okay.
So the next thing or another part of that is, speaking to more, advanced players playing either in college or they've been playing for years, that kind of thing. When is the equipment working for and against you, right? It's simple things. Do you have endurance issues or range issues? Is there discomfort when you play or pain after playing for a long period of time? Are you the kind of person who's never tried anything else, so you haven't, seen if there's something better for you? You should look. There's no reason not to. It can't hurt. If there's a music store you can go to, or if there's a friend that has a collection, go through and see what you can do. But it's, we talk to players all the time, and there's a local player here that I worked with a lot, and he was playing on a certain rim for a long time, and he's really happy with it, and he was, doing, he's using on everything he was playing basically, and he came in with an issue one day. They said, well, why don't we try a different rim? Let's try a similar size rim in our line and see how it works for you. And he played it, and he was like, you know what, that's a lot more comfortable. And all it was is 5 minutes to play a rim and say, oh, wait a minute, this is, I shouldn't be feeling like I'm either pinched or it's digging into my chops or that kind of thing. It should be comfortable for you so you can play the instrument and do the job you have to do. It sounds really simple and kind of silly, but that's the way things are. You'll know right away when something feels better for you.
Yeah, and Bob has a great saying that he wants you to find a rim that you love, not that you like. And then once you find the rim that you love, marry it and put it on everything you own. Put it on your B-flat mouthpiece, put it on your flugelhorn mouthpiece, put it on your cornet mouthpiece. Piccolo, maybe. There's two schools of thought on piccolo trumpet. Some people keep the same rim. Some people go to a smaller diameter. Whatever works for you. And then it all comes down to consistency, right? You go in and you do the routine. You do your routine every day, so you're so consistent, right? And I think what Dr. Seaver said on his previous thing, he wants to show up sounding his best on everything he does, right? And that's consistency. And if your equipment is set up to promote that, then you're set up for success. You're not fighting the equipment. You're not worrying about pain here. You're not worrying about one of the things, I think in the comments about the weight loss, right? Weight loss changes your lips. It changes your face. So maybe the rim that felt comfortable. I know we've had some of our clients, our customers that had Invisalign and they changed their teeth. You have to reevaluate and think outside of the box. Maybe something really big now works. Maybe something really small now works. That you have to reevaluate, and you have to have a plan of attack. And I know in my own playing, I learned a lot by experimenting. Not going crazy, not going on safaris and spending millions of dollars, but hey, what does something smaller feel like? What does something bigger feel like? What does something shallower feel like? And then you can start to, oh, well, that is kind of better. Oh, wow. So all of, some of the things I've been working on and trying to iron out in my playing for years, all of a sudden with a simple switch, we're done. Mm-hmm. And you could say, well, shoot, I wished I'd done that 20 years ago, but the next best time is to make that change now and moving forward.
Right.
So always evaluating and always thinking, has something changed? Dental problem, weight loss, as Brett's saying, your job has changed. That's the obvious one. Sometimes it's a surprise, sometimes it's not. So something we've been talking a lot. We're going to have some fun here in the shop. So we actually have a few other cameras set up here. So Brett is going to thread a rim, and this is something we do a lot. And I think Larry commented about the number of rim profiles we have. I mean, we have drawers of tools, but basically we have 7 or 8 standard rims.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you count the Proviance rims, maybe a few more. But what we'd rather do is have you come with something that you like, and we copy it or thread it. Threading it is obviously the more economical thing. So Brett, you want to go set up on the lathe?
Sure.
We have a mouthpiece that a customer liked the rim off of.
Sure.
They don't necessarily like the sound or how the mouthpiece played. So what do? Well, you cut the rim off, you put threads on the inside, and then you can screw it on a bottom part. So for example, on the Reeves mouthpieces, all of our pieces for the most part are screw rim, right? So you can take that rim that you love and a bottom part that you like the sound of and the pitch or the playability of, and you can put them together. And for not too much money, not too much effort, you can make a full-on custom mouthpiece. Because let's say you like a 14A4A rim, but you like the sound of a Monad underpart. Put the parts together. That would probably cost you $400 or $500 to have a custom mouthpiece made by someone, and for $50 a thread, you can take 2 of your favorite parts, put them together, and have a tool that you know is going to work for you without having to go on the safari. So, Brett's threading here, getting the lathe set up. So, of course, if you have any questions, Lacey, ask Bob if he will marry me. So a lot of you have been asking how Bob is. Bob is healthy and safe. I mean, bless his heart, he turns 89 this year. And he was out of the shop for a while. He had some blood pressure issues that kept him out over the holidays. And then, of course, he was starting to feel better, was starting to come back into the shop, and then the COVID outbreak. And because he's high risk, he is staying safe at home. I did a Q&A with him on Skype. That's up on our Facebook page. If you want to have him answering some questions that we did live, and we'll have him on again. But Bob is doing great. So thank you all for asking. And Lacey, I'll ask him for you. There was another question. Someone asked, about talking about the alignments we do on the road. Joe, are the valve alignments we do on the road as precise as those done on the shop? Yes, 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 and yes. I don't want to say even more precise because this is going out on the internet. But yeah, here's the thing. First of all, the travel lathe that Bob set up to do the work on the road, we can do 99.9% of the machining on that we can do here in the shop. So we can take care of just about any type of horn on the road, and we have. I mean, we take it to Japan every year. We take it to Australia. Last year we were in Croatia and Italy and the Netherlands. We've gone to, we're supposed to go to NTC this year, but got canceled. We've been to ITG, the Bill Adam Festival we've done every year, and the measurement is the same. It's myself or Brett doing the measuring, and the cutting is the same, the pad material is the same. So yes, it is the same. The tolerances are the same, and the only reason why it might be better is because I'm not being distracted by phone calls and emails and all the stuff that normally happens here at the shop. So while Brett's threading the rim that we love, inner diameter versus rim contour, and how rim contour can affect perceived diameter. That is a great question, Jeff. And this goes back to what one of our ground rules about being attached to certain things. You know, we have customers that get attached to a bore size. I have to play a 25 bore. I have to play on a 680 diameter. I have to play on a sharp rim. I have to play on a flat rim. And you know, not to discount what you're feeling or the results, but numbers are meaningless, you know. And I'm saying this from the perspective of a manufacturer. I mean, obviously, when we're machining to a tolerances, we're measuring. But then once you put that up to your face, what you're feeling and perceiving, there is no formula, there is no number that you can feel, okay? The bore is the easiest one, right? The bore is just a size, all right? We have a set of drill pins here, right? A bore is a tangible measurement. We can put these through a mouthpiece and tell you if it's a 27 bore or a 26 bore. This is tangible, right? So we like to fixate on a number, but we can make a 28 bore. We can make a 30 bore, which is really small, that feels wide open, right? We can make a 13 bore, which is or a 1/4 inch, right? We can make a giant drill size through the mouthpiece that feels tight by how we balance it, the cylindrical length, things like that. So to answer your question about the rim demonstration, I mean the rim feel and diameter, if a rim is sharp, that can feel bigger or smaller. If it's flat, if it's cushioned, that could feel bigger and smaller. The what we call the shoulder going underneath the bite into the cup, if that's angled in like a V or straight down like an orchestral B cup, things like that, and your lips fall in, that you can perceive as different. And no one can tell you how you perceive that except yourself. I can't tell you. I could take all the measurements of your teeth and lips and all that stuff, and I can't tell you what's going to feel comfortable and if something feels bigger or smaller. And that's kind of one of our principles here at the shop is we go with results. So we're not going to tell you that you need a 24 hole or that you need a diameter that's 640 or 42/64 or 17 millimeters or whatever. We're not going to tell you that because that number is meaningless. It might be at the best a ballpark estimate. I play around a 3C size. That's around a 42/64. But that doesn't mean this particular mouthpiece is going to feel comfortable to you. Just like I wear a 10.5 size shoe, but I could line up 50 pairs of shoes that are uncomfortable for me, even though they all measure 10.5. So great question. And again, that goes back to finding what works for you. So while Brett's threading here, I'm just kind of go through the comments. Yeah, David, yeah, that is true. When I'm at shows and my wife Susie isn't keeping me on task, I do tend to talk a lot and I don't stay on task. But when I get back to actually aligning, I stay focused. And I have my wife to crack the whip so that she keeps me on task because you folks come back and want your horns and I'm 10 behind because I've been telling stories. So, just in the interest of time while Brett's finishing up his threading there, so you have the mouthpiece that works for you, right? You found the rim that's comfortable. Once you find the rim that's comfortable, dialing in the rest of the mouthpiece, the cup, the back bore is not rocket science, right? Shallower cups are brighter, tend to get more compression, which makes the upper register respond easier. Notice I didn't say it makes the upper register easier, right? But it can make your upper register respond easier. So when you're playing lead or Latin music, things like that. Back bore shape is, you know, helpful for getting you to match the energy that you want to put into the instrument. So if you put a lot of energy in, like a bigger back bore would help. Also the breadth of tone. If you want a real focused projecting tone because you're playing in a big band or you're on mic and you want, if you're on mic, the tone that's going this way, most of it's getting lost. So microphone, you want a real focused sound because then all the energy is getting picked up by the microphone. Backbore can help control that. So all of that stuff we can help consult with. And again, experimenting doesn't hurt as long as you have a plan in mind. So then you have the mouthpiece, you have the horn. Brett, where's your safety glasses?
Somewhere.
We got OSHA watching. Normally they're on his head.
I don't know.
Philip, yes, or Philip, yeah, we do tilted mouthpieces. We can bend a mouthpiece up to 15 degrees, something we do fairly commonly, which is great for players with an overbite, or for some people it helps equalize the pressure or change the pressure on the chops, things like that. So, getting back to our order of things. You have the horn, it's been aligned, you have a mouthpiece that's designed to do the job you need to do. The last part of the equation is dialing it in with the gap. So what is the gap? So we have a receiver here, right? The receiver, for those of you that are equipment illiterate, which is fine, I was before I started working here. This is the receiver, and it's actually a separate piece that's soldered on over the lead pipe, okay? So this is critical. As you remember what I've said, the first few inches of your whole system is critical acoustically. So you have your mouthpiece that goes in to, this is a receiver, and you have the lead pipe going in here. And if you can see from the cutaway, that leaves a little gap, right? That gap, annulus is the technical term. What it is it's a chamber. It's an acoustic chamber at the end of the mouthpiece that we can use to control the response you get, the intonation on the harmonic series, all kinds of things. It's like the fine tuning on an old analog radio. For those of you my age or older, you remember you used to have the big dial to kind of get in the ballpark for your, to tune the radio, and then the last fine tuning dial to really make things, to bring in the clarity of the station. And this brings in the clarity of your playing, right? The big dial is the horn and the mouthpiece. The fine tuning dial is adjusting the gap. So this gap can vary wildly, both because of how the receiver is set and also on the shanks of mouthpieces, which tend to be where things go wrong a lot of times in consistency in mouthpieces. So what do? You experiment. You experiment. The paper trick, the Bob Reeves paper trick. 2 cents a paper, and if you're cheap, you can borrow a piece of paper from someone else, right? Get a piece of paper. Cut a strip, maybe about 1/8 of an inch long or wide by, it doesn't really matter how long, 1/2 an inch or so. You want to be able to handle it. So play something on your instrument, all right? Play something on your instrument, and I'm not going to demonstrate. I don't get paid enough here to actually play, unless it's a no airflow mouthpiece involved. So put the mouthpiece in, just like normal. Play your comfortable range. You want to play something in the lower register, something kind of in the upper register. Don't go crazy. And Brett, you're all done over there?
I am all done.
All right, so a customer sent us a mouthpiece. We decapitated it, and now we have a screw rim that we can now put on anything. It could be a Reeves mouthpiece. It could be someone else's mouthpieces. We don't care. All we care about is that it works. So there you go. A little show and tell on machining. Since we're kind of running out of time, Brett, you want to start getting set up for cut for sleeves?
I can.
Yeah.
Where was, sure.
So back to the paper trick, right? You've played something with the mouthpiece and the horn, maybe a little bit of articulation, covering the range of the horn. Now here's the critical part. You want to put that piece of paper we just cut lengthwise along the shank of the mouthpiece. A lot of people we talk to wrap it around. Don't do that. That's going to pull the mouthpiece out way too far. Okay, so you put the piece of paper lengthwise along the shank of the mouthpiece, and this is the hardest part, especially when you've had too much caffeine like I have. So you put the shank of the mouthpiece into the receiver with the piece of paper, and the paper is going to pull the mouthpiece out 32nd of an inch or so. Okay? And then you play the exact same thing you just played. And this goes back to testing horns, testing mouthpieces, any kind of thing. You always want to do it as scientifically as possible. And I love it when we have a player comes up here and they say, okay, I need a new mouthpiece, and they play their mouthpiece and they play Mahler 5, and then they say, okay, so I need something that's going to give me a brighter sound, and then I give them a mouthpiece, and then they play a Wayne Bergeron solo. It's like, well, how are you supposed to compare apples and oranges? So when you do the paper trick, play the exact same exercise, play the exact same arpeggio, whatever you just did. And what you want to do is there a perceived difference in the response? Was your articulation a little cleaner? You think of when you're swinging a baseball bat or a tennis racket or a golf club and you hit the sweet spot. right? When you're hitting that note, does it ping? A lot of times, and you Atom folks are often trading off, have someone listen. Okay, when we're here in the shop, we're listening to where does the sound start on the other side of the bell. This is hard to get recording yourself or from the other side of the bell, the podcast. We're listening, you want the sound to start right at the edge of the bell because that's where the player is working the most efficient. Sometimes it's too muffled and the focus of the sound is inside the bell, and sometimes it's the opposite. The sound focus is outside and it's too spread. So we want it to start right at the bell, and the gap is something that can help us do that. So it's helpful to have someone listening for that on the other side, and then you as a player, are some of those notes that are stuffy in the upper or lower register better? Are they worse? Can you feel a difference? If you don't notice a difference, or it plays better with the paper, then put a second piece of paper, third piece of paper, until the mouthpiece falls out. If it plays worse, dramatically worse, then you probably need to go further in, or you're at a good spot. Okay, so then how do you fix it? Whether it works or it doesn't work? Well, you send us the mouthpiece. We have two ways we can do it. We can cut for sleeves, which a lot of Atom teachers, a lot of Atom players, a lot of Atom students do. You'll see a lot of them with sleeves on their mouthpiece. And what Brett is doing right now is he's actually cutting a mouthpiece for sleeves. So we can cut any of the Bob Reeves mouthpieces for sleeves on order. You can send us any of your mouthpieces and we can cut it for sleeves. And what does that mean? We turn down the shank. We're going to machine down the shank so that it can accept these sleeves. And we have a whole variety of sleeves from big to small, right? And they'll pop on the end of the mouthpiece, which we'll be able to show in a minute here. That'll change the gap. And why is this important? And why is this better than filing down a mouthpiece? Or the worst thing we can see is we have customers that have actually shaved down the edge, the bottom of the mouthpiece. Well, you don't want to do that because you're shortening the backbore, right? You're changing more than one thing. And when you want consistent results, you change one aspect at a time. And by doing the sleeve system, you're only changing how far the mouthpiece goes in or out of the horn. Okay? So we can do the sleeve system. If you don't want to deal with a removable sleeve, some people just say, I want a new shank that's the right size. Well, we can talk you through how to find the exact right size, and then we can alter your shank so it's still solid, just at that new size. You get better pitch, better slotting, better response, and like I mentioned before, the optimized setup is when that sound is speaking right from the edge of the bell. Acoustically, that's what you want to have happen because that's when you feel like you're working the least amount, and the least amount that you're working, then the more you can focus on the music, right? Which is the whole goal. Any questions about the gap? Let us know. How do you advise dialing in the gap trying sleeves if you're quarantined at home? Well, yeah, the paper trick, David, is the best way to do it. And a lot of people are worried about having too big of a gap. They feel like their mouthpiece isn't going in far enough. And it's actually the opposite is true because you can experiment with the paper and pull the mouthpiece out. And by doing that, you can confirm if you need to go further in because it'll play worse, and who knows, it might play better with more gap. More gap can be a good thing, especially for lead players, commercial players, efficient players can use that extra resistance that may be caused by increasing the gap. Sometimes it's the exact opposite. We don't know because the gap will fine-tune the instrument to your mouthpiece, and this is the critical spot to how you like to play, what energy you put in, the sound you like to hear, and that's different. And there's formulas out there to experiment with the gap, and there's, I've heard, well, you need to have an 1/8 inch gap. You need to have an 1/8 gap, and it's just wrong. Because let's say for 75% of the players that an 1/8 inch of a gap is correct, well, there's 25% of you out there that's incorrect, and you're going to suffer because someone told you what gap you should have, or you calculated a formula. Schilke famously theorized that no gap was best. And there is some validity to that argument, but it's also false because the way he calculated it and the way he tested it wasn't scientifically correct. It wasn't blind. There was all kinds of issues with that test that he did. So, experiment. We go by results. If you come in and you play with no gap and it sounds best, who cares what the theory says? If you come back and you use our largest size and your mouthpiece has a giant gap and that plays best, go with it. We don't care what the number is. Dave talks about clocking the mouthpiece. Yeah, clocking the mouthpiece is important if your mouthpiece isn't made well. There we go. So we have a new mouthpiece. It's cut for sleeves, and you can see how the mouthpiece slides on. Now, normally we would plate the mouthpiece, and then there's a little O-ring gasket that goes on there that the sleeve will pop into place, and there you have it. Anything I missed on the gap? Oh, clocking. I was talking about clocking. Yeah, it's a good question. So if your mouthpiece is not made concentrically, then yes, that means the rim is going to be different all the way around the diameter of the rim. So there may be a certain spot on that rim that's thicker or thinner that sets up on your face better. Likewise, if the back bore or the bore is not drilled straight, which we commonly see with a poorly made mouthpiece, then yes, as you're turning it, where your air is going or the acoustic wave is stood up. I don't want to talk about air, careful. Old habits are hard to break even after 19 years. Right? That's going to change. And sometimes the shanks aren't round. So sometimes the shanks will go in at a different penetration based on where it's clocked in the receiver. And so that's going to change things. Now, like with a Reeves mouthpiece, we did a video yesterday. And actually, if we have time here, we got about 20 more minutes. You want to start making a mouthpiece?
Right now?
Why not? We got 20 more minutes. So we're going to have some fun with the last 15 minutes or so. And while I'm still talking here, you can watch us make a mouthpiece here. And we did kind of a little test video yesterday. And, you know, a big part of a Reeves mouthpiece, not to turn this into an advertisement, but, you know, we spend almost an hour, sometimes an hour and a half to make certain of our models. So that includes dialing a mouthpiece in, making sure it's concentric. I mean, it's impossible. I don't care how good you are making a mouthpiece. It's impossible to make two mouthpieces exactly alike. But our goal here at the shop is to get them so close that it's beyond human perception. You know, that means the tolerances are so close that they may be measurable with a micrometer to a tenth of thousandths of an inch, but you're not going to feel that difference. You're not going to hear that difference. The response is not going to be different. So that's our goal. And that just takes time. You know, that's the difference between a $200 mouthpiece and a $40 mouthpiece, is the time involved and what you get. Does that mean a $40 mouthpiece is not going to play good? No. I have plenty of $40 mouthpieces that play incredibly. It just means that from mouthpiece to mouthpiece and things like clocking are going to be less important the better your mouthpiece is made. Ron Appel, congratulations on your retirement, buddy, and happy you just had a birthday recently. Glad you liked the presentation. Do you advise testing out the gap on flugelhorn mouthpieces as well? Well, so here's the thing. On most flugelhorns don't have a gap. And this is also true with piccolo trumpets as well. And trombone players, if we have any of our low brass friends watching, you know, the mouthpiece goes in, and if anything, there might be a venturi in the pipe. Venturi just means the real smallest point, but there's not an actual ledge in there. And the ledge is what we care about when there's a gap. So, you know, it's not super critical on trombone, on flugelhorn, on piccolo trumpet, on cornet, same thing as well. There may be a small point in there, and if you're really far off, acoustically, there might be some funny things happening. Like let's say if you're using a flugelhorn mouthpiece with the wrong shank, and so the mouthpiece is sticking out way too far. That might have an effect, but it's not going to be down to, like, you need to be within 0.008 of an inch of the correct gap, which is what we often see on trumpet. So to answer your question, Matt, no, you don't really need, as long as you're using the correct shank on the flugelhorn, you don't need to have the correct gap. Is there a point where you should replace your sleeve if the plating is wearing off? Good question, David. Yeah, I mean, if it's getting worn, you'll need to replace the sleeve, but guess what? You can do the paper trick, right? Because as the sleeve is wearing, the gap is getting less and less. So slap a piece of paper on there and see if it plays better. And if it plays better, then you know it's worn enough that you need to move further out again, or maybe even experiment with a larger size. So yeah, good question. Max, yeah, I'm sorry. Thanks for asking that question again. I saw your question up, and Max was supposed to be our liaison on Zoom. So sorry, Max, for firing you. It was easier for us with all the setup here to just go directly to Facebook. But thank you for your question. Mouthpiece length, especially with the higher horns, and this gets into some different territory. Bob, a long time ago, experimented with different lengths for C trumpet and E flat, and honestly, when we blind tested customers, they were fine with the regular length mouthpiece. Let's put it this way: for the shorter, C trumpet and D and E flat, like they were close enough that really, we're taking off 15 thousandths, 20 thousandths of an inch.
I think the thing with that really is that those horns are designed with normal length mouthpieces in mind. When they're play tested, when professionals or whoever's designing these things are making these horns, they're using 9 times out of 10 they're using a standard length mouthpiece. So there is some truth that maybe a shorter mouthpiece would play better for a smaller horn. Definitely with the piccolos that is seen a lot, but for a D or an E flat, I think that they're just typically balanced close enough with the regular length mouthpiece.
Yeah, that being said, if you play a mouthpiece that's balanced for your shorter horn, because there's other manufacturers that do that, and it works, go with it. We go with results. And in fact, it's kind of funny, like we have, one of the prominent manufacturers makes a mouthpiece for each horn, and a couple of our customers have come in and said, well, their C trumpet mouthpiece works better on their B flat mouthpiece, trumpet, and their B flat trumpet mouthpiece works better on their E flat trumpet. But in their heads, they were saying, but the manufacturer says you have to do this. And they had to come to us almost like therapy and say, it's okay. Use what works. You're the one who's doing the job. You're the one with the audience. You're the one with the conductor up front, or as Bob calls, the assassin up front. Do what you need to do your job. Who cares what someone else has told you in terms of your equipment? Go with what makes you the most comfortable. Because look, when it comes down to it, and kind of getting back to the theme for all of this, is your equipment working for or against you? And if it's working against you because someone else told you need to do something, then you should kind of reconsider who your friends are. Us trumpet players love to give advice, and I think Bob's advice is if you can listen to the next 1,000 trumpet players who give you your opinion, run the other direction, because what worked for them isn't going to work for you necessarily. Now, obviously, if it's your teacher and they've had hundreds of students and they've seen issues, things like that. But I'm talking about the player that's sitting next to you that says, hey, you should be on a Bob Reeves mouthpiece. They're the best. Then you should definitely run the other way. Wait a minute. Chris John Shell. Hey, buddy.
I haven't seen him in a
Yeah,
while.
so we do make a short shank trumpet mouthpiece, piccolo trumpet mouthpiece that is shorter and balanced. After all we just said. It was originally designed for Maurice Andre and those Selmers, because the Selmers, when did those come out? The 60s or the 70s? They were really popular because Maurice was playing them. Smaller horns. Maurice Andre insisted on playing a trumpet shank, full-length trumpet mouthpiece, but the horn wasn't designed for a full-length trumpet mouthpiece. It just wasn't balanced correctly. So Bob, in the early days, developed, along with Bill Cardwell, a short shank piccolo mouthpiece that it is trumpet shank, but it's shorter, more like a cornet length. And it's still really popular. And also Blackburn made pipes that were designed for a short shank trumpet mouthpiece. So yeah, we still make those. Now here's the thing, in the last 40 years, like Yamaha and some others have developed piccolo trumpets for a trumpet shank with a full-length piece in mind. So then you can kind of go back and forth. Sometimes the short shank or the short length mouthpiece works better. Sometimes it ends up being too short, and you have to pull the tuning bit out too far. So again, it comes down to what horn you're using and the balance that you like to put in. So yeah, thank you for that question, Chris. And if there's any questions that you have about your particular situation, we have about 10 more minutes before we have our hard cutoff here. So Brett's doing some hand work on the front of the mouthpiece. Let us know. We're happy to answer your questions. You know, I know some of the things that I deal with as a player, you know, you're sitting in, you're doing what your teachers have told you, and you're having, you know, you hit a plateau, right? And so that's one of those signs when you need to reevaluate your equipment. You know, if you know you're doing the right thing, you know you're putting in your time, you know you're listening to your teacher's advice, and you're still having slotting issues, you're still having projection issues, intonation issues, it may be the equipment. So you always want to go in with a logical plan, right? Write down what issues are you having. Try a friend's horn, try a friend's mouthpiece, and see if those fix the issues that you're having, right? If you play your friend's horn and all of a sudden that D is not flat anymore, or, I mean, low D is always sharp, but a lot of times D and E and the staff tend to be flat. A lot of times those are things that are inherent in the instrument, and you play your friend's horn and that's fixed, maybe you should consider getting a new horn. Because why waste your time in the practice room trying to compensate for your instrument, unless there's really something about that instrument that you're really, really tied down to. Another thing I wanted to talk about, you guys were asking about testing things at home, and this is where the Atom method comes in great for testing the valve alignment. You don't have to send your horn out to us in order to test the valve alignment. And I had kind of started talking about this. When you're going through those Schlossbergs, right? Not all the time, but maybe tonight or tomorrow, when you're going through the Schlossbergs, instead of doing 1 and 2, right, do third valve. And really pay attention as you're going through them for sound, right, projection, things like that. Play open, second valve as you're going through, first valve, and then third valve. And I think you'll be surprised that sometimes those don't sound the same, right? They don't sound the same, they don't feel the same, and that a lot of times, as what I was talking about, the valves are out by a different amount. So that would, you'd get a different timbre, you'd get different pitch tendencies as you're going through the different valve combinations. And a lot of times that'll be a signal that you need a valve alignment. Could you adjust for those? Probably. Like, we're humans, we can adapt to everything with enough time, with enough natural talent, which I hate using that word, but I mean, some people are just natural and can adjust for things. But everyone hits that wall. And if you're playing between here and here in your gig, you may never need an equipment adjustment because you have the skill to play here, right? And your job is in here, right? You may never need the equipment because you're in such a safe zone. But it's when you get older, right? When you don't have the capacity, the energy to put in, when your lips thin out as you get older, or weight loss, or dental issues, or your job gets really hard, right? That's when these things, that's when you hit the wall. Yeah, glad you guys are enjoying us making a mouthpiece. Okay, so what are we doing now, Brett?
I'm getting ready to put the back bore in. So, I mean, I'm centering the mouthpiece to the machine because you don't want it off center. And I'm going to put the back bore in.
So we flipped the mouthpiece around, and I should mention, Brett is using Bob's original lathe. 1964 Logan, and great story behind that. Bob was a student of John Kleiman, and if you don't know John Kleiman, he was the first trumpet of the 20th Century Fox studio. Played all of the great epic films for decades for the Fox Film Studio back in the days when they had staff orchestras. And John Kleiman, during one of Bob's lessons, knew Bob was a Navy machinist and asked him how much it would cost to get a lathe and some tooling. And Bob came back to his next lesson and said, oh, about $1,500, $1,600. And these are $1964 we're talking about, right? And Kleiman wrote Bob out a check and said, we need a good mouthpiece maker. Go out and get yourself some tooling. Go get yourself a lathe and get started. And Bob bought the Logan and threw it in the back of his mom's garage in Glendale and started doing experiments for Kleiman. And then also, as part of that, he started working at the Benge factory in Burbank, and then also for Proviance Mouthpieces, who was a custom maker down in Hollywood. So we still use it every day today. It's a great lathe. Pretty much original. We've had to swap a few parts out on it, but still works great. And I should mention, as we're wrapping up here, because we got a few more minutes, I think one of the things, hopefully that you learned from us today is, I mean, we make stuff here, right? We do custom work, we make mouthpieces, we do valve alignments, but what we do is a service. You know, we help you so that you'll sound better once you leave, whether it be at our booth at ITG or whether it be through email or whether it be if you can actually visit us at some point. Our goal is that you sound better. It's not the Reeves name on the mouthpiece. It's not anything like that. It's that you can show up and do your job better because of us. And that comes down to Bob's experience. Bob was an incredible machinist. I mean, he made parts on manual lathes using slide rules and things that went to the moon, you know, and he took that machining knowledge to his mouthpiece making. But here's the thing, when he was working at Proviance, he could make a mouthpiece in 15 minutes, right? It's not that hard in terms of machining. But it took him a year before he realized that he knew nothing. He really knew nothing about how to help the customer walking through the door. And it's a story he loves to tell because Proviance had gone off. He wasn't in the shop that day, and a customer came in and tried a mouthpiece, and Bob didn't work. So Bob gave him something else. It didn't work. And they just went down the line for an hour, and Bob realized that you can't just hand something to someone, have them try it, and hope that you can solve their problems. He needed to understand the whole rest of it. So that became a lifelong endeavor, both to study the acoustics of the instrument and study the acoustics of the mouthpiece, but then applying that to what we as players and musicians perceive. And that's a huge, huge step to take because, as I mentioned before, we've designed a B flat and a C trumpet that plays perfectly in tune. We can design a mouthpiece that plays perfectly in tune, but guess what? Sometimes they sound terrible, or they may sound great, but they play terrible. So, so it's taking all of that thing and then using the words that a musician says to us, I need this, I need that, and translating that into equipment. So there we go. There we go. Finished up the mouthpiece.
That's it.
What's the next steps on that, Brett?
I mean, polish and plate, basically.
Polish it up, plate it, and we're good to go. So I want to take this time. We're running out of time. Thank you so much. I mean, to see the names, I mean, we're in between, what, Charlie Davis, Bob Slack, and Greg Wing, and then, I mean, follow up things like that. I mean, for us, it's like I'm tickled pink to be just included in this crowd. So thank you so much, Dr. Carl Sievers, for all you do. And everyone, all the Adam students and now the second generation to preserve the Adam legacy, they go way back with Bob Reeves Brass and Bob Reeves himself. And so it means a lot to us to be included in this. And so I hope you learned a little bit both about what we do here, but also give yourself some confidence about when you need equipment, how to evaluate it, which order to go through, so you don't go on safaris, right?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. I hope you stay safe, stay healthy, go fire it up, and I'm going to get back to watching the rest of these presentations. So take care. Bye-bye.